Nice to see you again on this beautiful day. This time with a quote by Kahneman again, where he says that nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it. That is describing the focus illusion. And Peyton, what do you think about this quote and how it relates to your life?
It relates a little more than I'm content to admit, to be honest. It feels like he's saying this directly pointing at the contents of my mind in the last week. This is the constant habit and tendency and temptation and conditioning that we have to tell ourselves stories in our head about what we like and about what we don't like and what we want and about what we don't want, and to live in this inner monologue where we are commenting about the way that we wish the world was, or the things that we want to be different, or the things that we must have, or the things that we must not have. And in this talking about them, in the languaging, in the labels, in the tendency to live in the map rather than the territory, we get kind of consumed by these thoughts, these narratives, these stories that are in our head. And then we get into black and white thinking, we get into what's right or wrong on principle, we become indignant, and we blow things out of proportion. We get caught up in our own narrative, and it causes us to feel that this situation in front of me is so life or death that it's something that I must defend myself from, as if it's an existential threat to my existence. That this thing in front of me is so significant and so permanent, not in our explicit language around it, but just in the way that we think about it, the way that it's implied. We aren't constantly reminded about how everything is temporary. We aren't reminded of the nuance of things. We aren't reminded that this narrative that we have is only one way to look at it, and there are other ways to look at it. And the consequence of this myopic disposition that many of our minds are conditioned to have, that we're reminded to have, is that we make mountains out of molehills left and right. We make permanent things out of temporary things in our stories left and right. And we make big deals out of things that are just passing waves of our lives, our relationships, and our existence in a way that can totally derange our life and our sense of freedom and our sense of happiness and our flourishing and our ability to actually form beneficial and harmonious circumstances and relationships in our lives. And so, yeah, I wish I wish this wasn't so relevant to me this week, because I've been totally in so much of these habits, and it's helpful for me to be reminded of some of the dynamics here. How do you experience this way that nothing is so important as we think it is when we are thinking about it? And how does this arise for you?
First, it is a reminder for me that I'm a human and our human minds are heavily biased.
Yes.
And when we try to figure out how to live a better life and how to be more peaceful or even happier, then we have to take that into account and also maybe find strategies for circumnavigating this challenge of blowing things out of proportion that we focus on. And especially nowadays where there's a flood of information, not information which is particularly helpful for you to lead a better life, but information which comes from all over the world about war, about politics, about everything that is not directly concerning you, only has an indirect influence on your life. But then we see that the media's main goal seemingly is to make every problem your problem, like Naval stated it once. And therefore, we can put the lever and say, hey, okay, now I try to minimize the distraction. Now I try to not listen to the news anymore. Now I try to just leave the devices a little bit for the next hour and go on a walk without anything, without an earbud, without a phone, just with me. And with that, we can reclaim a little bit of our life again, just through not being distracted with our focus on things that we don't want to focus on, that we tend to blow out of proportion. What do you think about this distortion on our decision making when we are like thinking about a focused thing? How does it distort us making a judgment?
Too much. And so I think that it comes in multiple forms, but ultimately, when we think recursively, when we have these repeated narratives in our mind that basically we endlessly follow and pursue and dwell on, it does create this dynamic of a game of telephone. And I don't know if you guys played telephone over in Europe, but when we were kids, we played this game where one of us would say a first message to this person, whispering in their ears, and then the second person would say what they heard to the next person's ears. And by the time you get down to the 20th person, what the message was that we thought we heard was totally changed from what you thought I said that. I said something completely different and nothing didn't even sound like it.
Yes, we call it silent mail.
Nice.
Yeah.
And this is how our brains work. We start off with receiving some input, some sensory observations or energetic observations in our experience. They arise on first impact. We observe them in our senses, and then the mind is very quick to tell us a story about what this was and what happened, the event itself that we observed. But now, rather than it being actual rich sensory nuanced input with energetic nuance, once again, now we have created black and white labels and clunky rigid boxes to put these events and their significance and their descriptions and the aspects behind them and what they imply into our map of existence and our reality and what is unfolding. But what's worse is, and that's natural, and we must do that to an extent in order to kind of process things or certainly to communicate them to others. But what happens very frequently when we download this, okay, this is my 3-sentence description about what happened today, then in the evening, this is what that means, and this is how I feel about that, this is what I think about that, and then a day later, this is what I don't like about that, this is what I do like about that, this is what I need to protect myself against, this is what I need to push away, this is what I need to go get, this is what is wrong with this. And then a day later, we're making, rather than the original description of this thing, now we've blown it way bigger. It's super personal to us. It's tied up in our narrative. It's tied up to our identity. And now our narrative about what's happened, because we've dwelled on it, because we've repeated it in our mind over and over and over, the mind has this tendency to play a game of telephone with itself, with repetitive thought, where on the 90th time when we've replayed our story about some circumstance or event in our mind, it's gone so far distorted from the original time when we received that information and converted it into language in our minds. It is this game of silent mail, as you call it, or telephone, as we call it, that happens in our mind. And where we find ourselves at the end of it is a distorted reality, a distorted view. And this distorted view that is actually different from external whatever happened in a way that divides us from our own experience, divides us from others, divides us from reality. Because if you have your narrative about what happened, I have my narrative about what happened, we each separate off and we're playing this game of telephone with each other. The original sensory data that we both received, maybe we originally encoded that into language in a slightly different way, but every time that we repeat the story, we're further and further and further and further and further apart, and to where now we see such different realities that we're no longer able to harmonize and find unity and see together and come to alignment of our understanding. And even if there's no other person involved, my own narrative, when it becomes very distorted from the actual reality that I encounter, this causes a separation from me in my reality. Because if I'm clinging on to this story that I've built up that's become further and further from the original truth, I am trying to then superimpose that over my view, over what I'm seeing and experiencing, and cling on to this and make it true, which divides me from receiving actual, unfiltered reality, new sensory information, new things that I observe to plug into my map, I might not be able to accept or receive new input and high signal information because I'm clinging on to all this noisy information that I've spun up and spun out of proportion of both its significance as well as an accurate representation of the original occurrences or circumstances that play on. So the distortion is in the matter of what specifically this is and how to describe it, in the sense that it changes over time as we repeat it to ourselves, as well as the significance and importance. The more time that we spend repeating this narrative to ourselves, the more entrenched we get in our identities about it, our narratives about it. It feels more permanent, it feels more rigid, it feels more important because we're just hyper tunnel visioned and fixated on this thing and how we're talking about it and thinking about it and our narrative and story and perceptions around it all. How do you experience this distortion that happens both in form as well as in degree of magnitude of importance that we place on things?
Yeah, in form and in degree, it is the more noise I consume, the more distorted, to a higher degree distortion I experience in my judgment about things. Because when I rethink it like 1 month later or 1 year later, usually it ends up when I had like a very strong opinion on something that was noise. It turned out that it was another way, a total another way which I haven't even thought about yet. And it's also good to become more and more comfortable with not knowing, and knowing that you not know what a particularly thing is or how it relates to one another, because there's a big amount of noise which comes from more and more channels in our world. And in order to not be overwhelmed, it is wise probably to cut the noise a little bit more. And the signal, if you really try to find answers to how to live a better life, how to build better relationships, and so on, then look into books which are over 100 years old, and you will find many great answers, because these questions have bothered people like millennia ago as well. Even what amazes me when I look at old books like Lucretius' De Rerum Natura, of the nature of things, how close he already was in understanding the physical reality as
Mm-hmm.
as a model, compared to how close we understand it with our models right now. For sure, there are discrepancies, but like 2,000 years ago, it was a very similar worldview than it is today a physicist holds now. Or go back and like how to win friends and influence people. Dale Carnegie. Or Horace, the Odes of Horace, where he describes how people can be happier together as well. And it's amazing how much answers you will find if you cut the noise and drill down to the resources which are already available, which you can actually do with AI tools right now. What I do is I go to gutenberg.org, download an old book, put it into Notebook LM, and then talk with the book, chat with the book, generate a podcast out of the book, put the mind map of the book like with the key concepts on my screen, and then go and drill down to the interests and curiosity that I have. So this is easier than ever to drill down to the signal, and ignoring the noise is still a big challenge as well, for me as well. So
Notebook LM tactic, that's appealing to me with a couple authors. Lucretius actually being one, where this is a mind that was just so ahead of its time, so brilliant. He saw so many ways that the world worked in a way that nobody even recognized for like 1,000 years until we came around to be like, oh, He wrote that then? And
Yes.
the other one that I want to check out, the Notebook LM, uh, this tactic of learning is Karl Popper, where I've
Yeah.
never found his writings accessible,
That's what I
but this
wanted
could
to
be a way that
say
I
and
could
connect.
access it.
Lucretius actually came to his worldview because he was like skeptic about the other worldviews of the predecessors of philosophy. So he was using the tools which Karl Popper described, the rational skepticism in
Hmm.
terms of, yeah, you have to have a falsifiable statement, and if you can falsify it, then you have to find a better statement and so on. So it goes like
Yes,
that's actually
yes.
very connected.
100%, yes. And then back to the original topic of blowing thoughts out of proportion. One quote that I don't recall who said it, but it's so true that uninspected thoughts are everything. Uninspected, our narratives totally dictate our reality and seem to be and consume and constitute our whole reality. Our story of liking and not liking is everything when we're not closely paying attention to thoughts. But when we inspect thoughts closely, they're almost nothing. When you actually say, look at this thought that's happening right now, put your hand on it, pay attention to it, watch how long it stays there, watch how substantial it is, see how much it can push around your body or your senses, you actually can notice that, oh, thoughts are basically just like written stuff on water that disappears almost as soon as it's created. They're ever shifting, and there's basically this inner voice or inner sight that just flashes almost like a superimposed audio visual over our senses, but it doesn't last. They're not substantial. They don't hold on. They don't actually whip us around, except to the degree that we let them, except to the degree that we're not aware and that we're unconscious of them. And so this what is the solution to this thought that, or to this idea that he's sharing on, look, we're getting thrown around by thoughts. They're kind of dictating our lives unconsciously. We're getting distorted, and we're making mountains out of molehills left and right because we're so obsessed with the words in our heads. First of all, that when you say cutting through, a lot of times, what is the essence of cutting through? We're kind of tempted to fight against thoughts, to resist thoughts, to push away thoughts. How do we solve this problem? The resisting, the pushing away doesn't work with thoughts. Thoughts don't really work that way. If you try to push away a thought, you accidentally hold it in place and it keeps going. If you try to fight against what you're thinking, it's not a good tactic, actually. If you pay attention to cause and effect, this is like an experimental claim, like go try to resist a thought and see if it stops appearing,
Hmm.
versus just pay really close attention to a thought you don't want to be there. Observe its essence. Observe how long it lasts. Observe it come up again. Observe the different forms that it takes. Pay close and close attention to the thought, and you will see that it almost releases you by itself. It's not that you have to cut it manually or rip it apart or something. It's like pay close attention, bring clear sight to it, and then it self dissolves. And then the last little thing that I'll call out about thoughts is the logic behind them. So a lot of times the logic behind our narratives, when we get really wrapped up, when our identity is threatened and we really are whipping up this story and we're weaving this big web about how our narrative is about reality and all this stuff. This temptation that I've found myself in a lot this week of like, I'm gonna need to think about this and plan about this and have my story about this and defend myself from this and not put up with this and need more of this and this and this and this wanting not wanting story. A lot of times underneath that, there's a lack of faith. There's a lack of trust. And the faith and the trust can be the answer to our capacity to let go of our struggling with all of these things. Because if I'm outside of faith, if I'm not having faith in the universe that things will be fine, that things will work out, that I will get what I need, regardless of what I think that I need, then I feel like I have to do things on my own strength. If I'm not trusting in the light within, or in God without, or in the reality without, then I feel like, oh, I better plan through everything so that I can control things, and so that I can make sure of things, and so that I can make sure that I have what I want and don't have what I don't want, and I can control reality. This is the stance. Even if we don't say those words, that's the implicit belief behind so much of our tendency to try to whip up this concoction, to whip up this narrative that tries to figure out the whole future and control the whole future. There's no faith and there's no trust. And so if we can come back to this faith that Basically, I don't need to perfect my narrative and win every argument in my head right now because I trust the light within me to come forth and speak the right truth in the right moment, in the right way, to the right degree, with the right force that is needed at the right time. That actual fruit of this awareness and the fruit of awareness that comes to just the right degree and finds the right balance without me getting involved or getting in the way or doing it, that faith can enable me to let go of my story because I know that the fruits of me following this thought, of me whipping up this narrative, of me clinging on to my ideas or my stories, or feeling threatened and trying to defend myself from the story of words in my heads and the stuff that I have to plan in the future, the conversations I have to remember, the conversations of yesterday that I have to stand guard over in my mind and replay and tell myself about what it means, the conversation I'm going to have tomorrow and how I've got to defend myself and I've got to ensure this is communicated and I can't let this thing happen and I need this to happen. The way to let go of all of that, when we feel these natural emotions of fear and the natural emotions of the ego, the natural tendencies of being a real human in a real human body, it's not that we need to self-hate those things out of us. It's not that we need to fight against those natures of ourselves. The answer is, one, to see clearly, to pay attention, to pay close attention to what is this pattern, what are the fruits of these patterns, what is my actual reality, what is my actual experience, senses, what am I seeing and feeling right now, and how does that relate to this thought? What is realer? What is the thought lasting? Is the thought objectively there? And then to bring this heart of trust, this heart of faith, that I can let go of this because I trust that if I let go, something wiser than me is going to put its hands on the wheel and it's going to do a better job that I'm going to do by trying to effort my way through this whole thing. And so this is the coming all the way up to we're dreaming that we're in a prison. We need to wake up from the prison dream, not try to saw through the bars harder. And this is only by recognizing that we have the opportunity to be lucid and to give up the war, to give up the struggle and surrender to reality and observe that better fruits, better flow, and better outcomes follow from when we can bring that faith to our life. Any closing thoughts from you on the solution, our intentions, or what to do about this status quo of these thoughts in our heads and the way they kind of spin us out of proportion a lot of the time?
Yeah, well, finding a strategy to deal with our distortions. Like, we are human, we are biased. We also can use tools, you know? And with that, for example, minimizing regret when we are thinking about life. And then life includes also suffering, includes dying, includes letting go, and so on. Includes regret. But what if we want to minimize the regret and use the knowledge of the biases and distortions we have to try to figure out a strategy to do it? And then I think about the five biggest regrets of dying people, which include I wish I would have lived my life authentically, or I wish I wouldn't have worked so hard, I wish I would have stayed in contact with my friends, and so on. So what if we just remember and remind ourselves from time to time that when we are working and thinking about, oh fuck, this is the most important thing ever, I have to get this done, I need to produce here on this deadline, otherwise my boss will be mad at me or whatever. And then a reminder of this focus illusion, that it is not important, and people who are dying regret having worked so hard and being pressured into like this corset of the societal expectations, pressure themselves into not living the way they know they should live according to their own nature when they know themselves. And then reminding yourself that, okay, this is hard to deviate from the societal pressure and expectations of others and the roles which others try to fit on you, whatever. It's hard to do your own stuff. It is. It comes with letting go of maybe monetary gains in the short term. It It means letting go of status or prestige you had, and subordinating yourself again in some role to make ends meet. But what it also means, it brings you much more freedom, and also the knowledge of to be sure that you won't regret your decision, because this is something way out of proportion. It's way better to live your life according to your authentic self than according to societal um, expectations. So reminding yourself will help a little bit. And I will remind myself this week, my intention for this week is to remind myself that it's okay to walk my own path. It is okay to live my own life. It is okay to connect with friends and old friends, and to connect with family and not work in that time. It is okay, because I won't regret that I reached out, and I won't regret that I cultivated a relationship. I won't regret that I lived according to what I know was true to me. So this knowledge of not blowing this out of proportion just because you live through it now, and the deeper knowledge of what really matters to your life. This is my intention, to remind myself of that. So what is your intention for next week, Peyton?
My intention is to hold all of my thoughts and my narratives much more loosely and in perspective, to see that these are limited views, that I'm not going to get to the bottom of everything successfully, that my best results are not going to come from figuring out the whole future and having the perfect narrative, but rather my life, my peace, my flow, and my results will come much better from a place of faith than from a place of me trying to spin up the perfect plan about everything and control everything. This is the perspective shift that I'm looking to bring. Just accept thoughts will come and go, narratives will come and go. None of this is permanent, and I can have a bit more of a sense of flexibility with all of this instead of getting so wound up and rigid in my reactivity to the story that I'm telling myself in my own head about what all is going on. So, some more wisdom, in short, is what my intention is to cultivate this week.
Wonderful, wonderful way to move forward. Thank you very much, my friend. It was a pleasure talking to you as always. And thank you very much.
It is mutual, my friend. Enjoyed the conversation very much. Thank you for your thoughts, and I look forward to talking on the next one.
See you soon, man.